Good evening, I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. It's been a challenging time for the legacy media. Their friends on the liberal side of the aisle have only one thing to say. Whatever Trump is doing today is bad. Well, not only is it not true, but it's become a really boring, broken record. And repetition doesn't sell when you're trying hard to get people to click on your stories. But equally important, the American people can see with their own eyes that it isn't true. Trump coined the phrase fake news during his first term, and now everyone uses it. And it's Trump who let the cameras in for two of his cabinet meetings already. Each cabinet officer had the time to explain what they'd accomplished and what they were going to work on next. I've never seen anything quite like that anywhere in the world. And what's the media doing? Well, they're taking their cue from the opposition. In this case, the Democratic governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. Listen to how he's trying to heighten the tension.
Never before in my life have I called for mass protests, for mobilization, for disruption, but I am now. These Republicans cannot know a moment of peace.
Well, take note that he was in the first in the nation primary state of New Hampshire when he said it. And the governor certainly knows how to feed the legacy media that will play again and play again anyone who takes on the president. Well, here's another not so clever line the media puts out. They show promotions that say they report the facts. But what they don't tell you is that most of these issues include several facts, but they only report the two that they like, and they ignore the rest that they don't like. Well, in doing so, they create a narrative that supports their spin. Their fake news, as the president refers to it. It's a selective manipulation of the truth, spinning their own version of a story to make it seem like something that it really isn't. Well, with that, I'd like to bring in a news veteran, anchor and reporter Doug McKelway. Doug, I noticed,
good to see you, Alan.
I noticed the turmoil at CBS News, which has been pushed to correct a report of a 60 Minutes interview with then Vice President Kamala Harris. Trump's filed a defamation suit saying the interview was deceptively edited. Well, recently the executive producer of 60 Minutes resigned, saying that he could no longer make autonomous editorial decisions, especially when the parent company of CBS is in merger talks that requires approval from the Trump administration. So, Doug, do you think he actually quit, or was he pushed out because he's going to be exposed for manipulating an anti-Trump interview?
It's probably somewhere between all of those things. Clearly, he doesn't like the pressure that he's feeling from the Trump administration in some respects to change their perceived bias, what Trump calls fake news. One of the genius components of Donald Trump, again, is his ability to coin new phrases that enter everybody's lexicon, fake news being one of them. And it's not without reason. It is not without reason. And 60 Minutes has had problems, as far as I'm concerned, with their bias. Going back literally decades. I'll relate to you an interesting thing that kind of sealed my perception of 60 Minutes. Happened back in 1986. I was an anchor in Kansas City, Missouri, and CBS 60 Minutes did a segment on the Audi 5000 and quote unquote sudden acceleration syndrome. The story was reported by Ed Bradley, who was today in the annals of journalistic excellence, one of the great standard bearers of great journalism from 60 Minutes. But Ed Bradley did a piece on the Audi 5000 sudden phantom acceleration problem. What was happening allegedly, and what 60 Minutes reported on, was these cars, when people put the brakes on, were suddenly accelerating beyond control and being involved in terrible accidents, things of that sort. There was some theory at the time that maybe it was just elderly drivers putting their foot on the wrong pedal. But 60 Minutes carried this notion, of a sudden unintended sort of phantom acceleration through and through with their reporting by Ed Bradley on that particular day in 1986. And I wrote a piece on it, on how wrong Ed Bradley's story was. And I'll quote from the piece I wrote many years ago. Ed Bradley did not tell you in 1986, when 60 Minutes filmed a sequence of an Audi 5000 surging out of control, that the acceleration was caused not by some undiagnosed demon, but by a man named William Rosenbluth, an automotive consultant retained by plaintiffs in a suit against Audi. Off camera, Rosenbluth drilled a hole in an Audi transmission and piped fluid into it, causing the desired lurching forward and the phantom sudden acceleration that CBS CBS 60 Minutes showed on their program. They drilled a hole in the transmission, 60 Minutes did, with the help of this guy. He pumped fluid into the transmission, causing the surge out of control, creating a fake news version of what the complaints about the Audi 5000 were. Anyway, so my problem with 60 Minutes goes back literally decades now. And whatever hits that program takes, I'm happy to see, to be perfectly honest. But it illustrates the broader problem with news in this country. And I thought that we might see a change after the 2024 election. They took such a drubbing at the polls that I thought they might be making some personnel changes and political direction changes. But I think now that Trump is back in office and settled in after 100 days, we're seeing the same factors manifest themselves that got mainstream media into trouble. The good news is there's so many alternative sources now for getting your information that in many respects, mainstream media outfits like 60 Minutes are becoming the dinosaurs of the media world.
Mm-hmm. You know, CBS News is also facing accusations that they didn't honor a commitment their morning show made to the former Patriots coach, Bill Belichick. Belichick sat for an interview that was supposed to be about his new book on coaching, but CBS turned the interview into a story about he and his young girlfriend. You know, I'm not here to defend Bill Belichick, but I will defend the truth. CBS News now denies that they agreed only to talk about his book. But that's the problem when you have a history of distortion. It's hard to ever know when you're hearing truth. Doug, is that analysis right? They just caught one more time?
I think that's pretty much true. It sort of gets to the heart of what the modus operandi are of the standard, mainstream media journalist in this day and age. And it's I don't know who coined this phrase. I don't think it was Donald Trump. It might have been Rush Limbaugh. He called it, gotcha journalism or drive-by journalism. But it's been around for a long, long time. My grandfather, who I've often referenced on this show, who was president of the Associated Press and editor of the Evening Star newspaper, had a different term for it. It was called entrapment. He called it entrapment journalism. And I suppose in some respects it may serve a purpose to confront people with things they might have said or might have done in the past that conflict with what the present positions are. But what it also does is it bolsters the reporter's credentials, his bona fides, and the present day criteria for what constitutes a good reporter. If you get them, if you got them with that gotcha question, then you're perceived of as a hero. Maybe you're gonna get a better contract, a higher pay, a more pronounced show that you get to host, or more front page stories. That's what oftentimes reporters are after. They're often just trying to please the boss. It's the bosses that I'm after in these situations. Who are they? Who is funding these news organizations? What are they demanding of their reporters? I want to know those kinds of questions, and they're much more hard to come by because it's all hidden behind veils of the finances and ownership and funding and that sort of thing. But the good news is that we are seeing changes in media, and I find it really fascinating that one of the great success stories in media nowadays is long-form journalism. You get the guys like Joe Rogan, who will have a guest on for 3 hours. It defies all the logic that TV news consultants have been telling their clients through the years. We have short attention spans. Shorter is better. Give me a 15-second soundbite. 20 seconds is too long. No, let's go to 10 seconds. How about a 5-second soundbite? That's no longer flying with the American public, except for the really low information voters. But people are thirsting for knowledge nowadays. I find that to be really a hard truth. And you can find it out there in the worldwide interwebs these days with podcasts, long-form stories, places like Substack. They're drawing a lot of viewers in, and what's happening is that people are afraid they're not getting the truth anymore, and they're seeking the truth. They're looking for it. And I hope that mainstream media and legacy media really suffers the consequences of this, because they deserve to suffer the consequences by being partisan.
Well, Doug, it's time to take a short break. Hope you'll stay with us for another segment.
I will.
Tell us what you think about what you've heard so far by going to ajnow.com. You can send us an email, and later I'll share some thoughts on all this from a biblical perspective. We'll be right back. We're back now with the former network anchor and reporter, Doug McKelway. Let's move from the media to the White House versus Harvard. The Trump administration froze the more than $2 billion in federal research money as a part of a broader initiative that targeted schools that didn't do a better job of policing anti-Semitism on campus. They also threatened to revoke Harvard's tax-exempt status. Harvard responded with a lawsuit. You've spoken openly, not about Harvard, but about the brainwashing that occurs when our young people attend these expensive college campuses. Can you tell us just a bit of what your family experienced?
Well, I think you may be talking about an anecdote I told about my younger son, my youngest son, Alexander, who dropped out of college because he was just so disgusted with what he was being taught. And a seminal moment for him was in the first day of class. I won't name the university. I don't want to get into all that, but it's because it's so common and typical. But he was in his class. The professor stood up on the first day and said, class, I'm such and such, and here's a little bit of my background, and I'd like you all to introduce yourselves now as we go through the class, and how you choose to identify yourselves. And they came to my son, Alexander, and he told the professor, my name is Alexander, and I identify as tall and handsome. He told me that story, and I stood up and gave him a round of applause, cheering on his defiance. He's not alone. I think there are a lot of young people who are sort of sick and tired of that kind of indoctrination they're experiencing. And it only gets worse at the more elite the institution is in the United States of America, and Harvard is probably exhibit A for all of this sort of stuff. I asked the indispensable Grok. I don't know if your viewers use Grok, but I strongly encourage them to. It's so easy. You go to X, to Elon's X, and there's a little insignia. It says Grok. You punch that insignia on. If you have a question about anything, write it down, and Grok will give you an answer that's completely legitimate. It is balanced. It's fair, it's thorough, and as best I can tell, it's completely devoid of politicization. So anyway, I asked Grok just before the program today to tell me how many professors at Harvard rate themselves as liberal and how many are conservative. And here's Grok's answer. It says, in 2023, 77% of surveyed Harvard faculty identified as liberal or very liberal. Approximately 2% identified as conservative, and less than 1% as very conservative, and about 20% identified as moderate. Anyway, that's very typical of what's going on in American colleges. This is why people say they're no longer interested in educating young people, they're interested in indoctrinating young people. And I would venture to go a little step further. I would say that a lot of these professors at these elite institutions are radicals, out of the Marxist philosophy. And the fact that you see these kinds of protests occurring on so many college campuses, Columbia University, Harvard, the anti-Semitism going on at some of these schools is, to me, just a real simple outrage. There are still Holocaust survivors alive in this day and age. Harvard University and so many of the elite institutions used to be at the forefront of combating this kind of stuff. And to see that it's resurging while there's still Holocaust survivors alive is an outrage. And if I were king of the world, or at least president of Harvard University, I would be rounding up those protesters and giving them a real hard education about what happened in the Holocaust and what led to it, and why any thought like this has to be tamped down or confronted with the truth. If you want to go to this university, we don't allow this kind of stuff at this university because it's beyond the pale of human experience. We don't permit it. But you see so many of these professors caving to that thing in the interest of free speech, which I'm all in favor of. But there's some things which are beyond the pale, and they shouldn't be permitted. And you can go express them on some street corner somewhere, but if you're going to be getting an education at this university, we're going to be intolerant of it, and I'm getting you out. I'm kicking you out of here. Here's your tuition money back. Take it back to mommy and daddy. Here's your mattress and your books. They're out on the street now. Bye-bye. I just wish there are more professors and more university administrators who had this kind of courage, but they're all a part of the system which led to it in the first place. So it's a real problem, and I'm glad to see the Trump administration taking a strong stance against it.
Well, McKelway for King of the World sounds like a bumper sticker. We'll have those on air soon. Okay, we'll work on that.
Okay.
Thanks for taking
a 10% cut.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking time with us today. It's nice to have you back again.
All right.
In a moment, I'll have some thoughts about our role in all of this and the truth that's not up for debate. And later, some of your emails. You know, there's an arena where I think we have to make some significant changes. I would submit that our American educational system has to change. The Marxist values which we have allowed to be promoted as enlightened, they're just not acceptable. DEI and CRT are not essential preparation for our students at any level. You can't separate education from worldview. It's a myth that suggests we can. How you understand the world influences how you think. A Judeo-Christian worldview has to be welcomed once again into our educational systems. We spent decades carving that out, saying that it had no place there. And so now we have a group of people that are educated, sophisticated, with a stack of degrees, but they're also opposed to these Judeo-Christian principles. Well, it's been an eye-opener to see the depth of anti-Semitism at our so-called elite universities. It reveals that they've not been teaching our children, but rather filling them with propaganda. We have to change it. Our colleges and universities must become more than just indoctrination centers for far-left ideologies. It doesn't make you enlightened to throw off the boundaries that God gave to us, boundaries that enable us to flourish. How dare they take our children and sexualize them and groom them for immorality and ungodliness, and then tell us that we have to tolerate it? We don't have to tolerate it, and if we want to see our schools and universities change, we as the church are going to have the courage to raise our voices in a new way, even at the risk of persecution. Showing boldness for God and His people has challenged every generation. It's one thing to serve Him when it brings smiles and gratitude. It's another thing to serve Him when it brings challenges. If we'll stand up, there are more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. When we come back, we're going to read some emails. Thank you for taking the time to send your emails. It's always a highlight when I get to read your thoughts and perspectives. Michael wrote in and he said, Paul knew his rights as a Roman citizen. He might not have understood all the ins and outs of the government of his time, but he knew enough. We should understand to defend our Constitution and the understanding of it. We know Joe Biden, as well as many of the public servants in Washington, are guilty of treason. Well, Michael, I think you're on to something. We've got to start teaching civics to our students again. We've lost sight of how our government is supposed to function, and we've accepted something that's not acceptable. Don Bradley asked about the episode with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Why do many courts give the illegal aliens constitutional rights when they're guilty of criminal immigration laws, breaking into the USA when they're not legal citizens? Well, I think the honest answer is that too many judges have a personal agenda that they put in front of their responsibility to uphold the law. It's a tragedy, and it has to change. I just want to remind you, you can go to ajnow.com and get an overview of our programs and a weekly newsletter to keep you updated on everything we're doing. And it's a lot. Finally, I'd like to ask you to include a friend or a neighbor in watching our program. Spread the word, and together we'll spread the truth. Thank you for watching tonight. I'm Alan Jackson, and I hope to see you tomorrow.